Well, I am so glad I found you. I was out here on my own, couldn't find a single place where I could feel at home. I was just amazed to see that you'd been here for so long. I'm grateful that you persevered. I wrote you all this song. I was thinking mango thoughts in a meatloaf town. The food for thought was all the same. It really brought me down. Nothing on the heavenly buffet line was satisfying my appetite for truth and right. I'd sit in here just...
Hello and welcome to the Progressive Redneck Preacher. I'm your Progressive Redneck Preacher, Micah Royal. For those of you who are new to our program, here at the Progressive Redneck Preacher, we try to lift up stories and voices that often go overlooked in our world. I don't know if you've noticed it, but I have, that so often the voice is being lifted up in our media about people of faith, and here in the South and in small towns throughout our country, only tell the stories and raise the voices of people who are using those values and that faith to silence those who are hurting and on the fringes, to shut them up and make them quiet, or to push aside those who seem different. And here at the Progressive Redneck Preacher, we like to lift up the voices of some of the folks that I know, and I know you know, who are people who have deep, deep connections to the South and to small town values, and who also have deep and profound faith. But it is precisely that faith and those values that lead them to be people saying, let's hear the voices of the hurting, and let's be a voice of healing and change for this world. Because isn't our God the great healer and deliverer? And today we're going to be returning to just such a voice. You may remember some time ago, Reverend Angela Roberson came and talked to us about criminal justice reform and scripture and faith. And today she's returning to talk about another topic that where we are called to be people of justice and healing. Welcome again, Angela.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's good to be here.
Glad to have you again. Well, we always like to sit down at the table, because here in the South, you say, put your feet underneath the table and you're welcome. So thank you for inviting me to put my feet underneath your table a second time, Angela.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. Well, this time I decided I would bring something for the table. And since y'all can't see it, but Angela can, I'll describe it. My sweetheart got me a box of chocolates on one of the anniversaries of us dating, and it made me smile, and I think it's making both of us smile as we eat it.
You got it right, yeah.
Because there's nothing in the world like chocolate to say, I love you, when you give it to a sweetheart. And I thought that was kind of an appropriate lead-in to today, because Angela's going to be telling us, you're going to be telling us, Angela, about some times that love goes wrong and how we can confront that in the church. Can you tell us about the work you've been doing around issues of domestic violence with families and intimate partners?
Well, I'm a social worker, and so unfortunately I get to see lots of domestic violence. I don't know if people know this, but here in North Carolina, if a child is a witness to domestic violence and the police is called, then the police also call social services. And so as a social worker, this is how I become familiar with incidences of domestic violence in my community. So this can be amongst husbands and wives. This could be amongst girlfriends and boyfriends. And I say so often to the couple, if this was just between you all, I wouldn't be here because I'm Child Protective Services. So I am here because this wasn't just between the two of you.
Yeah.
There was a child involved. So this is part of the reason why this issue of domestic violence is so near and dear to my heart, because the two adults have to begin to recognize and understand that what it is that is happening between them is impacting their children. And another reason is because I am a pastor. And if I remember the statistic right, 1 in 4 women have been impacted by domestic violence. So if you just think about this for a minute, if you go to church and there are 100 women in the congregation that day, that means 25 of them have been impacted by domestic violence. And so when we talk about domestic violence, we're talking really about families. And we have to, as Christians, we have to ask ourselves, what about families? And is this at any way justifiable? My answer to it is no. But then what becomes a pastoral response or a church response? One of the things I say is our response can't be something like, if it's in a case of emotional and verbal abuse, well, he hasn't hit you yet. Because I know that the saying goes, sticks and stones may hurt my bones, but words will never hurt me. But it's not true, because words damages self-esteem, damages one at their core. So there's words that should not be said between intimate partners. The words that should be said between intimate partners should be just as sweet as this Hershey that's on our table.
Yeah, and I think I'd add to that, and I'm glad you like the Hershey. I'm partial to the mango chocolate myself. Take a note, sweetheart, if you're listening. Is also to I'd say to the children, because I think what people overlook, isn't it, is those children. Sometimes they get the abusive words, and sometimes they overhear it and internalize it. The boy saying, "Oh, that's how I should treat a girl," or the girl saying that's what my worth is.
So I hear some women say, "Well, I'm staying because of the kids."
Yeah.
So I want to say up front that I don't tell women to leave or to stay. And the way I say it is like this: you got to walk in your own shoes, honey. Because when at the end of the day, you got to be, you got to know that you made the decision for yourself about what you're going to do.
Yeah.
But when you make your decision, there are some things you should take into account.
Yeah.
And so if you're making a decision to stay, you need to take your children's health and well-being and safety in grave consideration. And one of the other things I say to mothers is, so your son is 6 now, 8 now, 10 now, and right now he's just scared. But what could eventually happen is that he grows into his teenage years and begins to say, I'm not going to let this happen anymore. And when he tries to intervene between you and your spouse or your partner, somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody's going to get hurt.
Yeah.
What you going to do with that, mama? And the other thing in regards to your daughter, there is a way in which you are teaching her by example that this is what love is. And this is what relationships look like. And this is what you are to expect in your relationship. I'll tell this story and I'll be brief about it. But when I was in my early 30s, I was dating a guy. And we went out to lunch periodically. He was just a phone call away. Whenever I wanted to go to lunch with him, I just called him and, hey, we went out to lunch. And it was good and it was fun.
Did he get you chocolate? I mean, that's the question.
He got all my favorites.
Okay.
Yeah. And so one day I called and his mom answered the phone. And I could hear him in the background and he cussed his mom.
Oh, gosh.
And his mom carried on the conversation with me as if nothing was happening, right? She just engaged in conversation with me as if nothing was happening. And then I heard her say, and here he is. But I could hear him while we had been talking, cussing.
So this was clearly just normal for her to have him acting like this to her.
Yes.
Oh, goodness.
And then he got on the phone. And when he got on the phone, I said, this is it.
Yeah.
I don't ever want you to call me again. You don't have to worry about me calling you. Because I don't ever want to see you again. Because if you would cuss your mama, there ain't no hope for me.
That's true. So you knew then already that the way he treated them and the way he put on for you, it would be one they'd switch. He'd begin to treat you that way.
You know, I don't know if they do this in historically white churches, but in historically black churches, there's a saying. It goes like this: God is a God of a second chance.
Right.
But Angela ain't.
I hear you.
Not when it comes to this.
Right. You know you deserve better than to be treated that way.
Because if you treat your mother, the woman who birthed you into the world, the woman who wiped your stinking behind, the woman who wiped your snotty nose,
right,
the woman that prepared you for school,
right,
if you gonna cuss this woman, there ain't no hope for me.
Right.
And the way, which brings me to the way I think about domestic violence. Theologically, I think about domestic violence through the lens of the incarnation, such that God trusted a woman to impart into the womb of a woman. And he trusted that woman to push him out of her birth canal. And he trusted that woman to nurse his son at her breast. God cares for the body.
Yeah.
God trusted, the Creator trusted human flesh. And he loves it. And so therefore it is a desecration of the sacred to hit your intimate partner.
Yeah. I think that's such a refreshing thing to hear, and I'll tell you part of the reason why, and this is part of why I was excited to talk to you about it. You know, in my training to be a chaplain, I did part of it working as a chaplain at a domestic violence shelter.
Wow.
And a part of what I do, not having a lot of training in it yet at the time, was to do spiritual counseling with people there. And in this particular setting, it was mainly women and children. There are men who go through those sorts of experiences, but they tend to be placed in a different place than the women and children. And there were so many women, it would break my heart, who would tell me that they need to get away from this man. And it was hard for them to. And I'm sure that's the thing you talk about, why it's hard. I think people don't understand that. But one of the things that made it hard is they would go to the church for help. And some of the church leaders would be like, what did you do to make him act that way? Or you have to forgive him, and forgiving means accepting how he treats you. And there's a whole lot of things I see wrong with all of that, but I was shocked until I remembered seeing how women I knew in churches were treated growing up. You you know.
Yeah, so a lady told me that she went to her pastor to tell her pastor that her husband was verbally and emotionally abusive to her. He had not been physically abusive to her. He had been verbally and emotionally abusive to her. And she told her pastor. And her pastor said, well, he hasn't hit you yet. That was one of his first responses. Secondary to that response was, he's one of my best tithers. Which is to say, I'm not going to address this with him. And I'm not going to really give you any kind of good counsel, because this needs to stay as it is. Y'all need to stay as you are, because I don't want to lose these tithes. He might decide, if I were to address this with him, he might decide that he's going to go to another church. And then I will lose those tithes. That's not God speaking. If I can be so bold about it.
I'd agree.
And so, yes, the church has to interrogate what messages we are sending women about who they are as human beings and who men are as human beings. Because one of the things we have to understand is God created them male and female. Male and female created he them, so that man did not create female, God did. Which is another way to say that men are not superior to women. You know, it's not this hierarchy. There's God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit and male human beings and then female human beings and then children. That's not how God has this thing set up. And so there has to be a mutuality, an understanding that you are God's good creation and so am I. And if you are God's good creation, that in and of itself, period, point blank, should say, I don't get to dominate, control, beat up on you. And no, there isn't anything that I can do to provoke you to hit me. No. I'm not going to do it. Because you are created in the image and the likeness of God. And what we should be saying to women is, and don't allow. Don't permit. Don't allow. Don't permit yourself to undergo abuse. And yes, you have a choice. You have some options. And if you're in it, I cannot say that it's going to be easy to leave. I can't. It would not be correct to say it's going to be easy. And we have to acknowledge that every day is probably not a day that you're being abused, and that the reasons for which you ended the relationship was not because you wanted to be abused. So there was something, some quality of goodness and some attraction there. And that's what you're holding on to. And that's what you want in the relationship. But if this person cannot give this to you consistently without abuse, you have a decision to make. And no one else can make it for you. You have to make it for yourself. But you deserve to live a life free of abuse. Whether that's physical or emotional or mental or spiritual. This was in my teen years. I belonged to a Pentecostal church at the time. And we had something called Holy Convocation. It was big deal for us, big meeting. And so I was in conversation with this lady, and I invited her to Holy Convocation. And she said, "Oh, I know all about Holy Convocation," because she was a member of that church, also that denomination. And I said, "Oh, well, then I'll see you there." And she said, "No, my husband doesn't allow me to go." Well, that's abuse.
And I think that's the key thing when I was working at the domestic violence shelter that I learned. One of the things they taught us in our orientation there was that people think abuse is about anger and abuse is about violence, but they said that if you understand what people need right, abuse is anytime you try to control and dominate.
And this and that dynamic is why, as parents, you have to talk with your teens about domestic violence, because your teens must understand the difference. Adults too, but what I'm trying to get at here is to say we have to have earlier conversations about this, not just conversations with adults. We also have to have these conversations with dating people. We have to have these conversations with young people, because what they have to understand is the dynamics of control. Because otherwise, some people get romance and control confused. Oh, he only wants to talk with me, and he just wants to spend all his time with me. And if you're not careful, you get to see people who become isolated in their relationships, and this isolation, next thing you know, this person is being abused, because isolation becomes part of the tactic to maintain control over this person's life.
So what sort of advice or resources or programs would you point churches and folks to think about how to deal with situations like that and help people, whether the person's in the situation of being abused, is the abuser, or you're trying to prevent them from falling into that pattern?
So what I'm trying to do currently is to help people to understand the dynamics.
Okay.
All right. And to help people to know what the resources are in their community. And I am very familiar that there are church people who don't trust folks in the community with this. And one of the reasons they don't trust people in the community with it is because they think that the secular folks are going to tell you to get a divorce and get separated. And so what's in the back of the mind is, oh, you're destroying marriages. Well, one of the problems I have with this line of thought is, so then what you're telling me is that getting a beat down is not destroying a marriage?
Exactly. Yeah.
So are you telling me that putting bruises on this person and she can't go to work the next day, that's not destroying a family?
Yeah.
That children witnessing their mother being thrown against a wall, that's not destroying a family? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. When a marriage or a family system becomes a prison or a torture chamber, is it what God intended it to be in the first place?
And I think our whole society has got to look at, what do we mean when we say, I love you? What does that mean? We need to do a better job of talking with young people, of talking with young adults about love.
Yeah.
Romantic love. And what's appropriate and what's inappropriate, what's in bounds and what's out of bounds. And for the life of me, there's a way in which if you're married, I kind of get, because you actually entered into this covenantal relationship with this person, which I get that it makes it more difficult to extract yourself.
Right.
But you ain't put a ring on it, and you gonna boss me around?
Right.
Seriously?
Well, I think a difficulty that I think about my own life, and I think you're kind of highlighting in a way, is in the church we hold marriage up in high regard, which is good. We should, I was married for 12 years and widowed, and stood by my wife through illness, and my daddy just buried my mother after standing by her through illness and pain for 52 years. and we should hold it in high regard. But we can turn it into an idol, and it sometimes, I think, we can turn marriage into an idol. So we say, well, if you're married, that's what counts. So if people are dealing with issues about abuse or intimate relationships, and they're not married, we make the issue, well, you're not married, not the pain and the heartache or the joy and the support. And if they are married, we're like, well, you're married, so you're stuck with it. Instead of having this deeper conversation you're trying to have about what is love, what does it look like, because I know one thing I say as a minister, when people are dating, I say, well, you think you're going to get married, it's going to get better. It's going to be what it is, only more so, unless you do work. So if it's good, it'll be better. And if it's bad, it'll be worse. But putting a ring on their finger isn't going to solve your problem you're having with them.
So then, how many ministers do you know who do premarital counseling talk about domestic violence?
I don't know. I've not thought about that question.
Now,
I
would say that it would not be one that I would talk with them as a couple about. It would be a session in which I would talk with her in a session and talk with him in a session. It would not be them coming together and I talk about this, because I would not, because I think I would just simply, if it was going on, I think I would just simply be playing into the hands of whichever one of them is the abuser to do it with them both together.
Right.
I would talk with them, I've said to my congregation, if you know a couple who already got violence going on in their relationship, please don't refer them to me to marry them, because I ain't gonna do it.
All right. So you go ahead and have that conversation before they're married.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and clearly, since you do a Bible study on it, you talk about it from the pulpit. Those are two things that I think any church could do, but often doesn't. And if I'm honest, I preached on domestic violence, but I don't think I talked about it in premarital counseling myself. What are any other things that are practical things that churches and Christians and ministries can do to talk about this issue?
I say all the time, and I know I sound like a broken record, know your community resources and utilize them. I think one of the things pastors should rid themselves of is that they can do everything and they got the answer to everything.
Right.
Utilize your community resources and begin to make establish relationships with those community resources. That is part of what I'm trying to do. Yes, I pastor in this community. I want to pastor my congregation to the best of my abilities. Right. I believe that in order to best serve my congregation, I have to know what resources are available in the community, because I don't have the answer to everything, and I'm not skilled in everything. I recognize that I'm not skilled in everything, that there's some people in this community that are more skilled in areas than I am, and I want to be able to refer my congregants to those people to help them along those lines. So that's why we have here a community forum where folks in the community that deal with the issue of domestic violence come to the church and lay out what it is that they do professionally in the area of domestic violence. Because it's open to the community. My congregants get to hear that, but also folks in the community get to come and know what those resources are. And you don't just have a piece of paper to say, here, call that number. You get to see these people and interact with them and talk with them and ask them questions. But yeah, talking about it from the pulpit, thinking about it theologically, a Bible study in regards to it. I mean, if you have Bible study, even if you didn't want to devote, you could, I mean, there are places in the Bible that you can go to. Right. I mean, the story of Gomer is one of those places that you can go to talk about domestic violence. The story in Judges 19 that talks about the the concubine that was
Right.
Yeah, you can. There are places that you can go to in the Bible to talk about this issue.
It's one of those issues, once you start looking for it in the Bible, it's everywhere because our issues aren't new.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the patriarchy
Mm-hmm.
that's in the Bible,
Yeah.
we've inherited that patriarchy. And so we really have to interrogate what we think marriage should look like, what it should entail,
Mm-hmm.
relationship wise, how we treat one another. If we were married, Micah, the thing is, if I hit you, I need to understand I'm hitting a child of God.
Mm.
I hope that would make people pause and want to repent.
Yeah.
Because I actually do, as a Christian that believes in the living God, I actually do believe that God can change abusers. But what I don't believe is that the victim can.
Right. When I would talk about it as a pastor, I'm a chaplain now, one of the things I remember saying when I was preaching about this in the pulpit is what the church needs to do is quit telling the person who's abused, you need to stay with this person until they get right. But tell that abuser, you need to stop abusing. And if that means you go live somewhere else until you get right, you get right. Because that's where it lies. Because Jesus says a lot in the Sermon on the Mount about the language we use and that murderous heart and violence and, so I think it's amazing that this is an issue we soft pedal in the church. With all the things we preach loud about. Yeah. Mm.
And I can forgive you, but I don't need to be abused in the process of your healing.
Right.
That's the critical issue for me. The critical issue for me is not trying to tell you to forgive as much as it is that you are healthy and whole and not being subject to abuse while the abuser is getting their health and wholeness.
Right.
So while that person is getting healthy, I forgive you. And I forgive you enough to release you to God so that you can get healthy and whole.
Right.
Another thing I want to make sure that I get this in. The question most people ask is, why does she stay?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of women, or whoever's getting abused, sometimes it's men too, they get really judged for staying.
My question is, why doesn't he leave? If she's so bad and she can't do nothing right and you so unhappy, why don't you leave?
Mm-hmm. Do you have any insight for us on that dynamic?
Well, I'm just trying. One of the things I'm doing with that is really flipping the discussion.
Right.
Because when we ask the question, why does she stay? We stay and focus on the woman and what it is that she should or should not be doing, and we're judging her for the relationship she's in and for continuing to be in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm doing is I'm flipping the question to say, why don't we ask that other question? Because there are two people in this dynamic.
That's right. Yeah.
Why doesn't he leave?
Mm.
But the answer to the question, I mean, we could throw the pebble in the water and see all these ripples. But the real thing about why he doesn't leave is because he's in control.
Right.
And if I'm in control of you, why should I leave? Why?
Right.
Why should I leave when I'm in control? Why should I leave when you're going to do what I say?
Mm-hmm.
Why should I leave when I get to call all the shots? Why should I leave when I can have it the way I want to have it? Why should I leave when I can tell you how to dress, when to get up, when to go down? Why should I leave
Mm-hmm.
when I'm in control? But it also, that's one way of looking at it. And the other way of looking at it is to say, because what the abuser does is tell the woman how sorry she is and how displeased he is at some behavior or behaviors.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm asking the question then, if you're so unhappy and I cannot please you, why don't you leave?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a beautiful thing about the work you're doing, changing the conversation. Well, any final thoughts for us on this topic, or things you missed you want to make sure you bring out?
One other thing I want to make sure that I deal with is, so I've had older women to say to me, when I say older, I'm not really talking about women in their 80s.
Right.
When I say older, I'm really talking about women that are in like their 50s,
Yeah.
who have daughters who are in their 20s or their 30s, and their daughter who's in their 20s or their 30s is in relationship with an abusive man.
Mm-hmm.
And what these women, these mothers in their 50s, what a lot of them have said to me is, oh, she don't know what abuse is. See, I lived through abuse. See, my husband, he beat me. So I know what abuse is. And that stuff she going through, that ain't no abuse. Which gets to the point that you brought out and that I've been emphasizing, is that maybe her abuse does not look exactly like your abuse, but that doesn't make it not abuse.
Right.
So maybe your husband threw you down a flight of stairs, and maybe her boyfriend has not yet thrown her down a flight of stairs. That does not mean that when he pushed her into the wall that was not domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe your husband tried to throw you out of a moving car, and maybe her boyfriend has not yet tried to throw her out of a moving car, but maybe he has slapped her across the face. That still is domestic violence. And when he locks her out of the house and won't give her the key and disconnects some part on the car so she can't leave, that is domestic violence. And if she says she goes out with her girlfriends and she's going to be back home at 12, and she gets back home at 1, and you beat her up, that is domestic violence. And in the story of the woman who had not been physically hit but had been emotionally and verbally abused, the reason that she went and talked with her pastor was because although she had not, and they had been married for years, they had been married in the teens.
Okay.
They've been married for a while.
Yeah.
And he had not hit her, not ever put a hand on her, but he had been emotionally and verbally abusive. The wife went to the pastor. The reason she went to the pastor, the reason she decided I got to tell somebody, was because her husband had threatened to kill her, and she knew he had a gun.
Oh my, yeah.
And the pastor, even with that knowledge, was encouraging her to stay and saying, but he's one of the best tithers in my church. And I would say this to any pastor: if you're more interested in $1 than you are in the safety of your congregant, you are a poor pastor.
Yeah. And going back to in our last interview, we talked about looking at the story of Jesus. There is someone who's interested in coins and sells away a life in the gospel story too, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And Judas is not the hero.
Amen to that, brother.
Well, thank you for sharing about this, and for the work you're doing around this. Hopefully we'll hear more about it through your work in the church. I'm glad you could join us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Micah.
Thank you.
I was thinking mango thoughts in this meatloaf town. Now my soul is on a roll. I got you folks all around. We got us a feast for the spirit, a feast for the mind. We speak the truth, walk in love. That's what the ending would be if I were a sweet and earnest person. And Lord knows I do try. But here's the real ending. We got us a feast for the spirit and a feast for the mind. But in case of rapture, pack a snack, 'cause we'll be left behind.